Mary Barra is the CEO of General Motors, the largest automaker in the U.S. and one of the world's leading mobility companies. She's at the helm of GM's transformation into an all-electric future, producing only electric vehicles by 2035. Under her leadership, GM has launched several groundbreaking electric vehicles such as the Chevrolet Bolt EV, the GMC Hummer EV, and the Cadillac Lyriq. It's Barra's and GM's belief that this revolution will usher in a world with zero crashes, zero tailpipe emissions, and zero congestion. Welcome to Columbia BizCast. I'm your host, Fahad Ahmed. And in this episode, we'll hear audio from Barra's talk at Columbia Business School's Tamer Institute's 2024 Climate, Business, and Investment Conference, where she sat with Vijay Vitheswaran, the Global Energy and Climate Innovation Editor at The Economist, and gave audience members an inside look into GM's strategy to drive the EV revolution. It's a fascinating conversation that will take you through how GM is leveraging its scale and innovation capabilities to become the very best in the EV space through a fleet of vehicles that are beautiful in design, priced for affordability, and superior in battery and software technology to deliver the ultimate driving experience. It's an incredibly insightful conversation that shows GM's commitment to this revolution. Enjoy the talk, and here's Vijay Vitheswaran to kick things off.
You have a packed audience eager to hear your wisdom today. Thank you for joining us virtually and for gracing us with your insights.
Well, it's great to be here, so thank you. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but now is an incredibly exciting time at General Motors. We're going through some of the greatest disruption, and I view it as opportunity. If you think about it, it was more than 100 years ago when the world transformed from horse and buggy to motorized vehicles. So here we sit, and my role, along with the leadership of the company, is to make sure that we lead through this transformation and are successful and in business for another 115 years. And I really see it as our responsibility to solve some of the issues around crashes, emissions, and congestion. And to do that, we're building a portfolio of electric vehicles that will really give people choice. And we think that's going to be critically important to drive EV adoption. So this is an incredibly exciting time. Technology is changing everything. So happy to have a discussion and Q&A.
That's great. I'm glad you mentioned, of course, the EV transition. The Economist is 185 years old, so it's nice to see a young company like yours and one of those youthful disruptors, of which Columbia Business School has many, come along. You've set an ambitious goal of 100% zero emissions vehicles by the middle of the next decade. How is the journey going? I know that a long journey sometimes has some bumps on the road. So how do you gauge your own progress in I think a decade that you've been at the helm of America's most important car company?
Yes, well, thank you. And, I would say when you're going through a transformation as significant as what we're doing, and it's not just the way the vehicle is propelled, which is electrification or fuel cells, but it's also the vehicle is a software platform as well. So this is a very significant transition. Again, we never expected it to be linear. But right now, I think we are making great progress. GM had some production challenges last year, but now we are ramping up, and we will have probably the most wide coverage portfolio of electric vehicles from different segments, different price points, and different brands, all the way from luxury down to affordable with our Chevy products and Cadillac at the top end, and trucks like the Hummer, which is really a super truck. And I think when you give consumers choice, my view always has been in this move to electrification, because I think electric vehicles are better. They're incredibly fun to drive because the way the propulsion system, and we've done a dedicated platform that allows us to do purpose-built EVs, it really opens up all new design. And we all know design is a critically important part of being successful in the auto industry. So I think we're on a path this year. Our plan is to produce and wholesale between 200,000 and 300,000 of our Ultium-based EVs in this country alone, or I should say in North America. And we're really poised. There's a lot being written right now that the EV transformation is slowing, but two reasons. One is affordability, And that's what we'll be addressing with new products like the Chevrolet Blazer EV and the Equinox, but also ramping up charging. Because again, we need to reach customers that only own one vehicle and depend on it every day. And there's a lot of work going on in the charging infrastructure as well.
Let's spend a moment on both of those points, since you brought them up. They're important milestones on the road to market penetration. We'll get to charging in a moment, but on cost, it's been observed that the early adopters were quick to buy their, at first Teslas and later on American-made vehicles, but that the price point in America is higher than perhaps for the mass market. What is your strategy for getting that price down dramatically so that they are high-quality, reliable cars at a reasonable price for the consumer? What's your secret sauce there? What do you have in mind?
Well, when you talk about cost in EVs, it's all about the battery. And so working to have the right chemistry, one of the steps that General Motors is, we're in a joint venture, we're building our own battery cells and making our own modules. And so that gives us an advantage versus purchasing, and also gives us the ability to continue to innovate and leverage and use new battery chemistries to not only provide cost improvements, but also to provide more energy and with that more range. And so that's critically important. And I think our decision to vertically integrate there is going to pay dividends. We've said by the end of this year, our EVs will be variable profit positive, and next year will be to mid-single digit margins. And that's with putting vehicles on the road like the Equinox EV that will be in the 30,000 range. You mentioned that a lot of people, early adopters of EVs, the EVs were more expensive. And also that early adoption, those were for people who owned more vehicles. So if there was a use case that they needed where they were going to go on a long road trip and they weren't sure about charging, they just jumped in their internal combustion engine vehicle. And so that's why getting the right range at affordable prices and having robust charging is what's going to really unlock the value. And I think GM's well positioned. And you also mentioned quality. We have brands that people trust. Our brands have the highest loyalty in the United States, and we also have the highest quality as measured by J.D. Power. So I think we're well positioned, but you're absolutely right. Vehicles have to be affordable, and getting to that 30 to 40,000 range is where the bulk of new car sales transact.
So a big part of the answer was vertical integration, looking at manufacturing batteries. And of course, with that, we heard from a McKinsey expert earlier today about scale and the scale effects that come and cost reductions that come with that. That builds into this. And I heard also a little bit of the rapid learning loops that you get when you integrate closely with future battery chemistries, innovation loops that can be advanced. I know you have a new design center. You're working heavily on innovation made in America. So those are all the positives of this approach. However, vertical integration requires more capital, brings more complexity to your organization. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenge also of what is a different way of making cars, not just because of the drivetrain, but also because of corporate culture of where you allocate your capital? How are you thinking about some of the challenges that may come with a different kind of industrial structure that you're taking on?
Sure. One point you mentioned scale, and scale is vitally important. With scale is how we'll achieve profitability. And General Motors knows how to scale and has actually sells more vehicle in the United States than anyone else. And so that is critically important. And if you think about it, though, right now, this isn't a dramatic change because we make our engines right now. So we're really just changing the propulsion system. It was a change because in the past, virtually the entire industry was buying battery cells. So to be making them here, we think is important. But as I mentioned, the cell and the chemistry is what's going to allow you to have lower price and higher range and more energy density. And so we thought it was very important that in the key aspects of winning in electric vehicles, that we have tighter control as opposed to 100% reliance on the supply base. But to your point also, we are using this transformation, and because we did a dedicated platform, that's allowing us to do off our Ultium platform, something as small as an Equinox, which is a C-size vehicle for people who know the industry logo, but a small crossover, all the way up to a super truck or a commercial delivery van or a full-size pickup truck like the Silverado or the Sierra. And so being able to have a platform that spans that multitude of products, I think is vitally important to getting that scale and to making the customer have choices that they're comfortable making. But we're also looking at how do we simplify, how do we use new technologies in our manufacturing as well, and even at how we design, leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning, which is something we've been doing and will continue to do and expand as more opportunities there. So this is an opportunity, and we're seizing it to really change the way we make vehicles and design vehicles, and even engineer vehicles as we move forward.
So you alluded to a little bit of the consumer side of things. People need to choose, of course. Fundamentally, as a consumer company, we can go back to Sloan and marketing and the brilliance of the company's understanding of consumer choice. At the moment, if we look at a lot of the press, there's a discussion about an EV slowdown or challenges in the EV market. Our in-house view at The Economist is, in fact, if you look carefully, you're seeing a slight slowdown in the rate of growth of EV penetration rather than a reversal. But with that more nuanced analysis, I want to put this question to you. It looks like there might be a couple of years of challenging times for EV manufacturers before we get to 2026, 2027, when you might see the fruits of today's investments pay off in the marketplace. And you've alluded to some of those investments you're making now, new battery platforms, new brands, new models, a range of products, and an uptick that may come in sales. How do you plan to weather what might be a couple of challenging years, if indeed you accept the premise of that question?
Well, I think I agree that the rate of growth is slowing, but even, and we just recently looked for an update, but the external forecasters are still saying it's probably going to be about 10% EV penetration of the total vehicles sold in the United States. So that still does represent growth. Again, we think we're well positioned for new customers because we're going to have affordable EVs out this year, especially with the Chevrolet Equinox EV. So I think getting that affordability is going to be very important. We also think we have an opportunity with existing EV owners that maybe bought an EV 3, 4, 5 years ago, because when we look at our Cadillac Lyriq, the Silverado and Sierra pickups, the Chevrolet Blazer, we have a host of products coming where people will likely upgrade because they have more feature content, more range. And new. And from General Motors, we continually get anecdotal feedback from our customers of how much they love our new vehicles and really like the deep integration, like the design, and like the technology.
How do you assess the state of your competition? Obviously, Tesla is always there, but we see a huge amount of interest around the world in the Chinese competition. Janet Yellen was in China recently talking about the practices that Chinese have in terms of subsidizing their exports and the role of tariffs that may be involved. How do you see that competition from your global and domestic competitors?
I take all competition extremely seriously. I think there's many qualified auto producers around the world. And so how you win is by having beautifully designed vehicles with high quality in the right segments and at the right price. And that means we constantly have to be driving for more and more efficiency and also differentiate ourselves on the consumer experience, and also our serviceability and the ability to know you're going to be taken care of with your vehicles, the important role that the dealer plays. So, but we are constantly working to make every aspect of our business better because there is intense competition that's only growing.
So what's your position on, if I may ask specifically, on tariffs on Chinese imports? There is a new thought leadership piece by Columbia Business School academics that's just dropped that suggests that that's the wrong way to go. Support domestic manufacturing with subsidies, IRA, and other policies, but rather than engage in tariffs and blocking of imports. Is that a position that you can support?
Well, generally, our position at General Motors is if there's a level playing field, let the best product win. I think what is being looked at around the world with many governments is there a level playing field? And is there, when you look at, what are the tariffs in other countries, what are the requirements, et cetera. So, I'm going to focus on what I can control and making sure we have the right vehicles at the right prices with the right technology. But I do think there's a role for governments to play to ensure there's a level playing field, because the auto industry in so many countries around the world is very important to the economy and providing good paying middle class jobs.
Let's talk a moment about policies and moving away from tariffs. I think your position is clear. If we talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and the role it might play, as well as related policies, we had, of course, the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure laws, sort of a triple whammy of support for domestic manufacturing with a focus on clean energy, batteries, EVs. That's clearly been a boon to investment. We see the figures, serious investment figures in the US. It is an election year, and people are concerned what might happen depending on the outcome of that election. How concerned are you about the outcome of the election affecting support that you might have counted on or your investors might have counted on for your factories or for consumers to purchase the products you come up with? Is that a significant risk?
Well, we're obviously watching it carefully. I think a lot of what has been put in place is legislative. So it's not just who wins the election, it's who controls the Congress. But from a General Motors perspective specifically, we had our strategy about integrating or vertically integrating battery cells and doing that work ourselves. We have been working on making sure our battery raw materials supply chain is onshore or ally shore, just because of what we lived through with not only during COVID, but with the semiconductor crisis. So a lot of our plan was well in place before IIJA, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, or the IRA. Now, certainly, that's why we're well positioned to take advantage of those incentives for the consumer and also for manufacturing in this country. And so we're well positioned to do that. But I would say we felt the strategy was sound, and it wasn't just because of what was happening from a policy perspective. So, of course, we'll react to if there's any changes, and we'll continue to work to make sure our business is still strong. But I think if you step back and look at it more from a country perspective, I think what's important is, the IIJA was broader than just facilitating EV investment in EVs and specifically investments in the charging network. And the Inflation Reduction Act is very significant in that it's very focused on having the right supply chain and having resiliency in the United States. So I think you have to look at the higher level reasons for why the both acts were passed and what they're working to accomplish, in addition to how it might be advantageous for EV adoption at this current time.
I think we'll have to see what happens, I guess, with the elections. We'll know soon enough with the outcome. My own reporting on this, I've spoken with lots of folks in the industry and lobbyists, suggests that there is strong support for the IRA on both sides of the aisle, particularly because most of the money is going to red states, projects that are supported locally by businesses and local politicians and governors. However, the one area that does seem potentially at risk are credits for EVs. So we'll see. There does seem to be some animus in the GOP if there were to be a clean sweep in Congress, but we can't answer that today, so we'll put a pin in that. I want to maybe step back a bit from the specifics. We've gone deep into the weeds on EV strategy, but if we step back to the bigger picture, as you look to your next decade of leadership of the company and the company's future, do you see the company transforming in the long run beyond a company that makes vehicles to something that could be a mobility company, a kind of platform for something bigger? I know you have investments in other areas, cruise, some other things that go a little beyond simply a personal conveyance vehicle that's owned or leased by the individual. Can you give us your vision for the longer term?
Well, I would say our purpose is to pioneer the innovations to move and connect people to what matters. And so not only is what's changing in a dramatic fashion is the way the vehicle is propelled with electrification, but as I mentioned briefly before, the vehicle is a software platform. And I think there's so much that we can innovate and create to make the consumer experience better while they're in the car, have that connectivity with the vehicle. And so I'm very excited about that piece of it as well. And I think, we want to have great, beautifully designed vehicles that have the right software to really change the customer experience. And we're just at the start of that. So that's what makes this transformation so exciting. There's really two that are happening at the same time. And then, as you mentioned, we still are very committed to autonomous technology. and we own are the minority shareholder of Cruise. And we think that an important part of our vision to create a world with zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion, that autonomy is a very big piece of that. And also,
because people are terrible drivers, basically, isn't it, Mary? Let's be honest.
Well, the interesting thing about that is 85% in the United States, there was a survey done not that long ago. 85% of US drivers feel they're above average. So the math doesn't quite work there. But yes, they do. But the other thing is people love to drive, and people want to have that freedom, even if they're leveraging, today I'll call it rideshare 1.0 with Uber and Lyft. But I think there's opportunity with autonomous as we move farther. And you're exactly right. Tragically, was just released, and more than 40,000 people lost their lives in traffic accidents. When we've assessed that in the past, over 90% are caused by human error. So autonomy done well and safely definitely will improve safety.
Now, it has to be said, Cruise has run into some difficulties of late. How are you handling that, both from the perspective of learning from the mistakes, but also some of the market valuation hit that's come as a result?
Sure. We learned a lot, and I would say Cruise operates as an independent company. One of the things we have really focused on, and we are working much closer with Cruise right now, you have to build the right relationship with regulators at the local, state, and federal level. We do that at GM as normal course. It's so important to make sure the regulators understand how we work to ensure our vehicles are safe and high quality. And so we're really building on that, as well as, I think and we're seeing this with AI more broadly. Human beings have more tolerance for human being mistakes than they do for technology mistakes. And so we'll continue to raise the bar because our autonomous technology at Cruise had already been assessed to be at a higher level than, I'll say average drivers, but we'll keep working to improve it.
Great. Now, I had mentioned before the second plank of the future I wanted to come back to, and that's charging infrastructure. It's an essential enabler for obviously a lot of the things you want to do. But I want to maybe keep with that futuristic theme. I see that you've recently launched a Silverado Home EV charger, if I'm not mistaken. That raises some very interesting prospects for not only charging at home, but vehicle to home, bi-directional charging by 2026. I think you've promised all your models will have that incorporated by around that time. Can you talk about the bigger vision of micropower, of having millions of vehicles that are capable not only of consuming power at the periphery, but also perhaps supporting the grid, of time shifting, of arbitrage, maybe even being profit centers for their owners or providing grid ancillary services? That has always been part of the vision of those who think about the future of energy systems. We're not there yet anywhere in the world, but where do you see your company playing a role in promoting that, and some of the things like your new home EV charging kit? Where does that fit in that picture?
Well, I think you've outlined it quite well. I think there is huge opportunities for EVs. People are worried, is the grid strong enough to charge the EVs? But an EV can play a very important role. When you think about investment has to be made as grids are modernized or the energy companies are reinvesting, instead of always having to invest to peak load, can the EVs play a role in shaving that off? The Silverado EV RST model will be our first that has bidirectional, and will be out this year, that has bidirectional charging capability that, for an average home on a fully charged Silverado will be able to charge for well over, power the home for well over a week. So I think there are ways that we need to work together. And, I think it's a very interesting concept that consumers can use their vehicle and it can, not only provide power when there's outages, but also maybe allow them to have lower rates if they're charging at off-peak hours, or even allowing their EVs for charge to be pulled during peak. So I think this is a new business. We've talked to many energy companies around the country and around the world, and we're all working together to really open this up and optimize. And I think there's a lot of work that's going to be done here that's going to push us forward from an energy perspective.
The last time EVs had their early start, around the time of the clean tech boom, there was also competition from hydrogen fuel cells, if you recall. Daimler with the Ni car, a new energy car. There were numerous attempts in Tokyo. They still continue to have some faith in the Mirai and fuel cell vehicles in Japan and to some degree in Korea. Do you believe that there are alternatives to the alternative of EVs, meaning whether it's hydrogen fuel cells or maybe some kind of advanced biofuels that could still play a role, electrofuels as Porsche is betting on for Europe's new regulations? Or do you think it's time to declare those alternatives dead and say, all right, we've got a winner, RED 23, EVs, let's double down and triple down and scale this up? What's your perspective?
Well, General Motors was one of the companies that has been working on fuel cells, and we've never stopped. But what we've seen is this with this transformation from an EV and a fuel cell perspective is even though EV cost is an issue, fuel cells are still more expensive. We're working on our third generation right now that will continue to take costs down. So we're coming down the technology curve. And what we're seeing is EVs are the right solution for light duty applications, but fuel cells do have a place in heavier applications because they can be refueled rapidly. They're less affected by climate. And so we do see a role there. We think, likely fuel cells will be first more significant in fleets because the challenge for fuel cells is you've got to have a hydrogen infrastructure. But when we think about fleets, they can install that, take care of their fleet, operate out of a central refueling hub. And we also see plug-in hybrid technology in strategic segments will deliver some of the environmental benefits on the way to EVs. And we're still very committed to EVs, but there'll be a role. We already have hybrids in some countries. We think, depending on how quickly the charging infrastructure is built out, they'll have a role in the US as well.
If we look across the world, I'm reminded of the old quote from William Gibson. He was quoted in The Economist 20 years ago saying, the future's already here, but it's unevenly distributed. And in that way, we can look at Norway, 90% of new vehicles are electric this year. China, perhaps 40%. We'll have to see what the final figure is. But if we go beyond the lead markets of 15 big markets, not that much yet. So I wondered, could you give us, when you look globally, what do you see happening in a big market like China, where you're also present? It's been one of the very important markets for you over the many years. I think you have an arrangement with NIO, which is one of the upstart challengers coming out of Shanghai. Can you give us a sense of what's the dynamism of that market and opportunity for you there?
Well, from a China perspective, it is very much a market in transformation to EVs, largely regulatory driven, but also with incentives. And so that's what, when you see, again, I always say an auto customer, if you think about it, their vehicle is either their most important or their second most important purchase they make. They're extremely rational about the purchase. And so when you look at countries like Norway or look at China and you look at, what the incentives are, you can shape consumer behavior. And as you have the right charging infrastructure, et cetera. We see China as a very important market because although, it's been flat and stalled a bit, we still see tremendous growth opportunity in China. And we think we can play there, especially with our brands like Buick and Cadillac that are very well received. And so as this market is changing, we're working to, and we're seeing a rise in domestic Chinese EV manufacturers. Right now there's over 100. That's going to have to sort because only I think less than a handful actually make money. That is not a sustainable path. But I think it will sort over time. We think there's room there, but very much they're ahead on EV adoption, and it's largely driven by policy, and it's also driven the innovation there. And that's why I'm encouraged with things like IRA and the IIHH that really do encourage this development and innovation and IP ownership to happen in this country as well.
Are there any other markets that you look at? How do you see the outlook? I know you had to step back in Europe from your own strategy in terms of internal combustion engines, but do you see any opportunity for EVs there or other lead markets other than China?
Oh, absolutely. We believe in an all EV future. We actually we did sell our Opel business to, at the time, Peugeot PSA. It was a good deal for both of us, and we called it a win-win-win. It was a win for Opel. It allowed PSA to become the number 2 manufacturer in Europe. And General Motors was able to participate in the strength of that through the way the deal was structured. So no regrets on what we did there because we were subscale from an ICE perspective. But now we're launching EVs in a couple countries and we'll continue to grow. So we see Europe as a growth market for us now with primarily an EV portfolio and some iconic vehicles like the Chevrolet Corvette.
Great. We're going to turn to audience questions in a moment, so I'm going to ask my audience to get some questions together. I think we're going to have some microphones for you, so please make yourself known to people with the microphones. And while we get ready, let me maybe ask one more question of you, Mary. You know, one of the old adages of American politics is what's good for GM is good for America. So give us an idea. What's good for GM? What would you like to see? Whether it's in policy or in other changes that you don't see yet, that would be good for your company?
Well, I think it's important that we continue to encourage, as I mentioned before, not only infrastructure development in this country, but also investment in battery raw materials so we have better control of our supply chain, but also doing the core research. And there's a lot of startups and work going on from a battery perspective. Companies like General Motors are working on it as well. I know universities are as well. So I'm very encouraged by that. And because I think this is such a significant technology that the United States needs, and other countries are doing the same, but they need to have core IP development in these key technologies that are going to be so important for our future. At GM, so we're focused on that, working with many different partners, but I view my role is to make sure we're running a very efficient business that is satisfying and surprising and delighting the customer so we continue to grow and exist. And that's what I focus on every day.
Great. Well, to be delighted by EVs, we're looking forward to that. Let me see. Do we have a question? I think we do. Okay. As always, please identify yourself and let's make it a question rather than a long-winded speech.
Excellent. Daniel from Columbia Climate School, thanks for being here. I'm actually not going to ask a sustainability question. I'm going to ask a kind of customer experience question. I know some Apple users were concerned to hear that GM was planning to phase out Apple CarPlay and kind of create a new version with Google, working on a new kind of Android-based experience. I'm wondering if you can talk about your perspective on kind of the customer experience in the car and how you think about working with these major tech players. Thank you.
Well, I think we want to work with the major tech players and provide a great experience in the vehicle. What we were seeing, though, in the customer feedback we were getting is if you're in a Google environment or you're in if you go into Apple CarPlay or Android Auto and you want to step out of that environment to do something with the vehicle or even between, it gets pretty clunky. So it's not very seamless. And so, our role and we want to, as I said, delight the customer. The in-cabin experience is vitally important. And so we're looking for a more integrated, where it's very intuitive for the customer. Your phone still connects and there's, many of the features, music, context that can still be seamless. But it was, if you've been in a vehicle where, especially some of the latest vehicles that are more advanced, you do see that it can get kind of clunky. And so this is all based on customer feedback and being seamless to make sure that we're really focused on what the customer wants, regardless of what phone they use.
Mary, how much of the decision has to do with finding value in the data that at the moment perhaps the Silicon Valley companies are extracting and amortizing better than Detroit companies?
Well, the way we look at it is, yes, the data is important, but what we really want to focus on is owning the relationship with our customers directly, as opposed to being just the hardware manufacturer. As I've mentioned, the vehicle already is a software platform. So we have that's going to be what distinguishes vehicles and what you can really do to innovate going forward. So to give that to one tech company where, our customer base, not all of them even use that phone, didn't seem to make sense.
Great. Another question here on this side.
Yes, hi. Very interesting conversation. I have a question from the consumer perspective.
Please identify yourself.
Excuse me?
What's your name?
Oh, yeah, Mary Swatek, Columbia Business School graduate. So I have a question from the consumer perspective. My understanding is that the EV batteries do not do well in severe cold weather. And so what is General Motors doing to address that?
So, that's battery technology. That extremely cold weather does tend to have an impact. We are constantly working on improving that. And I think through some of the cold spells we had through this last winter, our vehicles performed well. But that's something we're constantly working on to improve because, again, customers depend on their vehicles, whether it's warm, whether it's cold, when they unexpectedly need to take a long drive. So that is critically important, and we're constantly improving that.
Mary, on the question of having a plan B, am I right that having initially wanting to go directly to EVs, you are perhaps tactically now investing in hybrids as a stepping stone? Is that fair to say? Because again, if you do have a plug-in hybrid, you can rely on this smaller internal combustion engine to save you if your battery doesn't come to the rescue.
Yes, we did, and we still believe and are primarily focused on shifting to EVs, as I mentioned earlier, because we think they're better for the consumer. I mean, once you start driving EV and you never have to go to a gas station, it's especially if you can charge in your garage. Not recognizing not all customers could do that, but if you look at the regulatory environment, and as we get into the latter part of this decade, it's a pretty steep curve. And will the charging infrastructure be there that gives people who only own one vehicle comfort that their only vehicle can be an EV? And with the recent regulation that's come out just in the last handful of months, plug-in hybrids are actually fairly significant in meeting the regulatory requirement. So, we want to offer customers choice. We think plug-in hybrids are a real option. We've had them in the past. So we have the technology. It's a matter of integration. So we will provide customer choice, but we won't move off our goal to be all electric with our light duty applications in the United States by 2035.
Great.
Okay. But we have to be customer driven. Again, we are going to win when we meet customers' needs, and we've got to be sensitive and responsive and agile to make sure we're continually meeting customers' needs.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm Tom Sahajian from the School of Professional Studies. In addition to the work GM is doing on charging, is there any plan to have hot swappable battery modules in addition to the charging infrastructure? Thank you.
I know there's some companies that are working on that right now. I think it ends being fairly expensive to do that. I think so. It's something we're constantly looking at and what would enable that. But right now, I think we're frankly more focused on having high quality EV batteries with long range that have appropriate charge times, and then making sure, working in partnership with many companies to have a resilient charging infrastructure.
Thank you. My prediction is we'll see that leapfrogging in India and other countries sooner than we will in the US. Yes, next question.
Hello, my name is Amanda Pico. I'm from SEPA. I'm going to ask a geopolitical question, obviously, on your outlook on China. It seems to be the case that GM's sales are obviously tumbling in China. I'd be just curious to know, do you see it obviously by virtue of increased competition, geopolitical headwinds, and what is your outlook for American businesses in China, especially since the recent delegation that met with Xi Jinping 2 weeks ago?
Well, I would say that we've had a very significant business. We're still in the high single-digit market share in this market that's going through major disruption. Anytime you have that many new entrants coming in, you're going to see shifts in market share. And I think there are many Chinese OEMs that have done, have very capable vehicles. I think in some cases, in key segments, we weren't as quick as we should have been with the right EVs. We're doing that. So I think there's a place for us to play and participate in that growth. But I think there is shifts going on in the China market, especially with the number of domestic companies and with the high penetration of EVs.
Is your partner longstanding joint venture with SAIC, Shanghai Automotive, the right sort of vehicle, so to speak, for you? Is that the right way to tackle a market with 100 very cut rate competitors?
Well, I think, as we went there more than 20 years ago, the requirement was to have a partner. I think SAIC is a very, very good partner. I've worked with them personally for years. And I think working together, we can be a strong competitor as we move forward. So I very hold SAIC in very high regard.
Okay, so you're committed to them. Let's go to the next question.
Hi, I'm Laura. I also go to SEPA, and my question is related to sustainability. How are you guys thinking about responsible sourcing of raw materials, and how is that affecting your business model, your costs?
Thank you.
So that is part of, regardless what we're sourcing, we have requirements that we hold every supplier accountable to make sure that we're meeting our high standards. As I mentioned before, we also, from a battery raw material specifically, are working to have resiliency in the supply chain, and also are making investments in this country or in North America generally to create new sources of the key battery raw materials. But however we do that, it will always follow our values and our guidelines from a sustainable and a responsible sourcing model.
How much additional cost do you think it adds to go fully sustainable in your supply chain?
Well, when you say fully sustainable, we obviously have made our own commitments from a corporation. We actually are encouraging all of our supply base to do the same and sharing lessons learned, because there's many cases you can do things and you do improve the business. So it's a journey that we're all on as we look to really create a zero emission future. But I would definitely call it a work in progress, but we work to do this in a way that it doesn't add cost. Because at the end of the day, I don't think that in some cases there's a limited slice of the consumer base that will pay more for that. But the general consumer, because vehicles are such an important and expensive investment for them, we need to make sure we find solutions that accomplish both.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Dominica Wombold. I work with clients on...
A little closer to the mic, please.
Sorry. Dominica Wombold. I work with clients on supply chain manufacturing and efficiency. I was curious about what GM is thinking in terms of the aftermarket supply chain and sustainability in that space, whether that's directly or working with suppliers and third parties, and also to what extent the charging network fits within the aftermarket segment versus kind of how that's supported sustainably directly by GM near term.
Well, we actually have a very robust aftermarket business within General Motors that does quite well and offers consumers a lot of choice. And so, and from a battery perspective, every battery we put on the road today is completely recyclable. We have a dedicated team that looks on how we recycle, and actually, we think that eventually can be a business for us as well, and help and kind of create a circular economy, especially for certain battery raw materials. So we continue to work on that. Your question on the charging infrastructure, I wasn't exactly sure what you're referring to.
Sure. So I didn't know that GM did aftermarket themselves. So with some of the other companies, I was interested in looking into the different spaces there. But do you look at the charging network infrastructure as something where you'll support it like post-production and be involved in the decisions to do with, for example, how the energy is sourced?
Well, we want to make sure from a charging, we're working with a number of companies, so we're already partnering from a charging infrastructure. We have installed some chargers on our own, but we're more of a partnership model. For instance, we just created a partnership with I shouldn't say recently, but we're now installing chargers with the Pilot company. And that's really for major interstates. So when you're on a road trip, you have charging. What we're really focused on from a charging perspective is that it's a seamless experience. When you go to a charger, whatever it is, one, it's actually there, it's working, it's available, and it's easy to use. And so that is our focus, and we'll create an ecosystem to make sure we're providing a good experience from a charging perspective for the customer.
We've got time for one last quick question with a quick answer. Please proceed.
Hi, I'm a student of Columbia Business School MBA course, and then my question is, what is key difficulty you are facing while achieving Scope 3 emission target, like especially when working with the suppliers outside the U.S., like where there are different like regulatory standards?
Well, I would say we have we work with over 20,000 suppliers directly, and then there's the tier 2s, tier 3s. It's a massive undertaking, and I would say there's huge variation right now. But as our tier 1s start to focus and make progress and do what we're working with them and they cascade it, I think we'll make progress. But it's a big undertaking, even just to really understand where it's at from a transparency perspective and collecting the data. So tremendous amount of work to do.
Mary, you can't see us perhaps, but there are long lines of questions waiting to be asked. So just a testament to how appreciative the audience is of you giving your time and of giving such rich and fulsome answers to our questions. So I think on behalf of everyone, thank you. And we join you in giving you a round of applause.
Well, thank you. It's been a real opportunity. Great questions. I hope you stay committed to everything you're doing from a supply chain and from a resiliency and sustainability. So thank you all very much. I hope you all have a good day.
Great. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed that inspiring conversation between Mary Barra and Vijay Vithaswaran. Quick closing words from me. Over and over, Mary spoke to GM's commitment to being consumer-led in their transformation to an all-electric future. GM is putting the customer at the center of everything from design to delivery to price to performance. And it's about leading with purpose, vision, and courage in the face of uncertainty and disruption. And because of this, and as someone who is currently in the market for a new car, I'm definitely going to consider an EV by General Motors. Stay connected with CBS to learn more about how the school is helping students and alumni develop the skills and mindset to lead the EV revolution and other climate solutions by following us on social media. Thanks for listening.